"Is this some kind of joke?" Gunnery Sergeant Miller barked, his voice cutting through the tense silence. He wasn't looking at his Marines. His glare was fixed on the old man standing quietly behind the firing line. "Do you even know where you are, old man?" Dean Peters, 82 years old and dressed in worn jeans and a faded work shirt, did not react. He held a long cloth-wrapped object in his hands, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. They missed nothing. He watched the flags on the range, each one telling a different story, a symphony of chaos that the young Marines' advanced equipment couldn't decipher. "This is an active live-fire range for force reconnaissance snipers," Miller continued, stepping toward him. Miller was the archetype of the modern warrior, chiseled, confident, and draped in the latest tactical gear. His ballistic computer was strapped to his wrist, a piece of technology worth more than the car Dean drove. "Civilian presence is strictly prohibited. I need you to leave." Now, Dean's gaze drifted from the windswept terrain to the gunnery sergeant. His eyes were pale blue, the color of a winter sky, and held a depth that seemed to absorb Miller's aggression without reflecting any of it back. "The wind is tricky today," Dean said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "It's not just one wind, it's three." Miller let out a short, incredulous laugh. A few of the younger Marines shifted uncomfortably. They had been at this all morning, their state-of-the-art Kestrel wind meters giving them conflicting readings, their ballistic solvers spitting out firing solutions that proved useless time and time again. The target, a small steel silhouette at over 1,700 yards, might as well have been on the moon. The exercise was designed to push them to their limits, to simulate the impossible shots required in the mountains of Afghanistan or the vast deserts of Iraq. Right now, the impossible was winning. 3 wins, right, Miller scoffed, crossing his arms. "Listen, Pops, I appreciate the folk wisdom, but we have equipment for that. We're dealing with Coriolis effect, spin drift, and barometric pressure that changes every 5 minutes. It's a little more complex than holding up a wet finger." Dean offered a simple, non-confrontational shrug. "That computer of yours can't see the thermal updraft coming off those rocks at 1,000 yards, and it can't feel the downdraft from that ravine on the left. The flag at the target is lying to you. It's showing a left to right, but the valley is funneling a current in the opposite direction just this side of it. You're trying to solve one problem, but the bullet has to fly through 3. One of the younger Marines, a lance corporal named Evans, lowered his spotting scope. He'd been watching the mirage boil and churn all morning. What the old man said made a strange kind of sense. The heat waves were flowing in different directions at different distances, but he wouldn't dare voice that. Not to Gunny Miller. Miller's face tightened, his professional pride stung. This old groundskeeper, he'd seen him mowing the grass near the barracks, was lecturing him on long-range marksmanship. "And I suppose you could do better?" he challenged, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He gestured at the long, cloth-wrapped object in Dean's hands. "What have you got there, anyway?" "Grandpa's squirrel rifle." Slowly, deliberately, Dean began to unwrap the object. It wasn't a modern tactical rifle with a carbon fiber stock and an adjustable chassis. It was a thing of wood and steel. The walnut stock was dark with age and linseed oil, scarred and dented in a way that spoke of a long, hard life. The action was a familiar bolt-action design, and the scope mounted on top was simple, with none of the complex turrets and reticles of the modern optics on the line. It was an M40, the rifle of a bygone era, a relic. The snipers stared. That rifle was a legend, something they'd only seen in museums or historical photos from the Vietnam War. To see one here, in the hands of this old man, was surreal. Miller let out a disbelieving chuckle. "You cannot be serious. You think that antique can even reach the target, let alone hit it? The barrel on that thing is probably worn smooth." He pointed at the rifle stock, at a particularly deep gouge near the bolt. "Look at this thing. It belongs in a museum. You're going to hurt yourself." The moment Miller's finger pointed at the worn wooden stock, the shimmering heat of the range dissolved in Dean's mind. The world went green and wet. He was no longer 82 but 19. The air wasn't dry and dusty. It was thick with the suffocating humidity of a Vietnamese jungle, the smell of mud and decay heavy in his lungs. Rain fell in a steady, lukewarm drizzle, plastering his uniform to his skin. He was lying on his belly in a nest of ferns, perfectly still, his heart a slow, steady drum against his ribs. He held the same rifle, its walnut stock slick with rainwater and mud. The gouge Miller had mocked was fresh, a shard of shrapnel from a mortar round that had landed too close just minutes before. Through the simple scope, he watched a small clearing a half-mile away. An enemy machine gunner was setting up, a position that would pin down an entire platoon of his brothers. His breathing was the only thing in the world he could control. He let half a breath out and held it, the crosshairs settling. The wind even here was a liar, swirling through the triple canopy jungle. But he didn't need a flag. He watched the way the rain slanted, the way a single leaf trembled on a branch. He squeezed the trigger. The memory ended with the quiet thud of the suppressed shot, a sound swallowed by the jungle. Back on the range, the sun beat down. Dean's eyes refocused on Gunnery Sergeant Miller. The old man's expression hadn't changed, but something in his presence had settled, become heavier. He had heard the mockery, but it didn't land. The rifle was not a museum piece. It was a part of him. Lance Corporal Evans watched the entire exchange, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He was a good Marine. He respected the chain of command. But he also respected his elders, and the gunnery sergeant's blatant disrespect felt wrong. More than that, there was something about the old man, a flicker of recognition in the back of his mind. He'd seen him around the base for years, always quiet, always keeping to himself. But he'd also heard stories, whispers from the old salts at the armory, legends about the quiet groundskeeper who used to be somebody. Miller was now fully committed to his course of action. His own failure on the range had curdled into anger, and Dean was the perfect target. "I am not going to ask you again, sir. This is a restricted area. You are a civilian, and you are creating a safety hazard. Put that weapon down and step away from the firing line." Evans knew he had to do something. He couldn't confront the gunny directly, but he could make a call. "Gunny," he said, standing up. "My spotting scope's reticle is swimming. I think the nitrogen seal broke from the heat. Permission to take it to the repair shop at the armory." Miller, distracted and annoyed, waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever, just get it fixed. We're not packing up until we hit this target." Evans grabbed his scope and jogged away from the firing line, his heart pounding. He didn't go to the repair shop. He ducked behind a line of Humvees, pulled out his phone and found the number he was looking for. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "Armory, Master Gunnery, Sergeant Phillips speaking." "Master Guns, it's Lance Corporal Evans, from Charlie Company." "Evans, what can I do for you? Don't tell me you broke another $30,000 scope." "No, Master Guns. I'm out at Whiskey Jack Range with Gunny Miller's team." Evans lowered his voice, glancing back toward the firing line. "You're not going to believe this. Gunny Miller is tearing into that old guy who helps tend the grounds. The quiet one." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The old man with the limp, that's him. But Master Guns, he brought a rifle with him. An old M40, and the gunny is about to have him arrested for trespassing." Evans hesitated. He called him Dean Peters. The silence on the other end of the line was sudden and absolute. It stretched for a full 5 seconds. When Master Gunnery Sergeant Phillips spoke again, his voice was completely different. It was tight, urgent, and stripped of all its earlier gruffness. "Son, are you telling me that Dean Peters is on that range right now?" "Yes, Master Guns." "Stay right there, Evans. Do not, under any circumstances, let Gunny Miller put a hand on him. Do whatever you have to do. I'm making a call. Just keep them there." The line went dead. Evans stood behind the Humvee, a new kind of dread creeping up his spine. He had the distinct feeling he had just pulled the pin on a grenade. Colonel Marcus Hayes, the commanding officer of the Marine Raider Training Center, was in the middle of a budget meeting that was making him wish for the relative simplicity of a firefight. His aide, a young captain, knocked and entered without waiting for a response, his face pale. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a priority call on your direct line from Master Gunnery Sergeant Phillips at the main armory. He said to tell you it's a Whiskey Jack protocol." Colonel Hayes frowned. There was no such thing as a Whiskey Jack protocol, but he knew Phillips. The Master Guns was a man who had forgotten more about the Marine Corps than most officers ever learned. He didn't engage in hyperbole. Hayes picked up the phone. "This is Hayes." He listened, his posture slowly stiffening, his knuckles turning white where he gripped the receiver. His side of the conversation was short, clipped and escalating in intensity. "What? At Whiskey Jack Range, with Gunny Miller's team. Who is there? Say that name again." There was a long pause. The colonel's eyes widened, a look of profound shock washing over his features. "Are you absolutely certain?" He listened for another moment, then slammed the phone down onto the cradle with a crack that made the captain flinch. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The budget meeting was forgotten. "Captain," he barked, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. "Get my vehicle, now. Tell the base sergeant major to meet me at the front entrance in 2 minutes. We are going to Whiskey Jack Range." Lights and sirens all the way. Back at the range, Gunnery Sergeant Miller had reached his breaking point. The old man's placid refusal to be intimidated was more infuriating than any argument. "That's it. I'm done with this circus," Miller declared, his voice rising. He took a step closer to Dean. invading his personal space. "Sir, I am giving you a direct order to vacate this military installation. If you refuse, I will place you under apprehension myself and have the MPs escort you to a holding cell." To emphasize his point, he reached out and placed a firm hand on Dean's shoulder, intending to guide him away from the firing line. "You are interfering with a live fire exercise and endangering my Marines. We're done talking." Dean didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He simply looked at the younger Marine's hand on his shoulder, then up at his face. The look in his eyes was not anger, not fear. It was something closer to pity. A profound, weary sadness. That was when the first siren cut through the air. It started as a distant wail, a sound so out of place on the remote range that everyone stopped. All heads turned toward the long dirt road leading from the main base. A plume of dust was rising, growing larger by the second. It wasn't one vehicle. It was a convoy. 2 black command Humvees and a military police cruiser, their lights flashing silently in the bright sun, were speeding toward them at a pace that tore up the road. The convoy screeched to a halt just yards from the firing line, doors flying open before the vehicles had fully stopped. The first man out was Colonel Hayes, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of cold fury. Following right behind him was the base sergeant major, a man who looked like he had been carved from granite. The entire range went deathly silent. The snipers who had been watching the confrontation between their gunny and the old man snapped to attention. Gunnery Sergeant Miller froze, his hand still on Dean's shoulder, a look of utter confusion and dawning horror spreading across his face. He had been in the Corps for 15 years and had never seen the base commander and the sergeant major arrive anywhere, let alone a firing range, with such speed and intensity. Colonel Hayes ignored Miller completely. His eyes were locked on Dean. He strode forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, stopping directly in front of the old man. He looked at Miller's hand on Dean's shoulder, and his eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. Miller snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Then, the unthinkable happened. Colonel Hayes, a full-bird colonel in command of the most elite training facility in the Marine Corps, snapped to the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute Miller had ever seen. His back was ramrod straight, his arm locked, his gaze one of pure, unadulterated respect. "Mr. Peters," the colonel's voice boomed across the silent range. "Sir, I apologize for the conduct of my Marines. There is no excuse for the disrespect you have been shown here today." A collective, silent gasp rippled through the line of young snipers. Their gunnery sergeant looked like he had been turned to stone. His jaw was slack, his face ashen. He had gone from being in complete command to being the object of a colonel's wrath in less than 30 seconds. The sergeant major walked over to Miller and spoke in a low, terrifying whisper. "Gunnery sergeant, what in God's name did you think you were doing?" Colonel Hayes held his salute until Dean gave a slow, almost tired nod. Only then did the colonel drop his hand. He turned to face the stunned group of snipers. His voice was cold, hard, and carried the weight of command. "Marines," he began, his voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. "You have been failing this test all morning because you believe the technology hanging off your rifles makes you marksmen. You have been humbled by a mile of air, and in your frustration your leader chose to aim his disrespect at a man whose boots he is not worthy to polish." He gestured toward Dean. "For your education, allow me to introduce you to the man you have been disrespecting. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Dean Peters, retired. He quite literally wrote the doctrine on high-angle and extreme crosswind shooting that you are all failing to apply. In Vietnam, they didn't have names for the enemy snipers, but the enemy had a name for him. They called him the Ghost of the A Shau Valley." The colonel's eyes swept over the young faces, each one now a mask of awe and shock. "Mr. Peters holds the 3rd longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history. A shot he made in a monsoon, with winds that would make today look like a calm breeze. And he made that shot." The colonel paused, letting the words land with maximum impact, "with the very rifle your gunnery sergeant just called a museum piece." He turned back to Dean. "Mr. Peters. Sir, would you do us the honor of showing these men how it's done?"